In every endeavor, there are those who stand apart. Those who have excelled. Those who've attained recognition as leaders through their training and experience. As a PADI Divemaster candidate, you are on the threshold of joining the dedicated individuals who lead recreational diving, the PADI Professional Membership. Congratulations! You've accomplished much to get where you are. Now the PADI Divemaster course will take you across the threshold into the leadership circle. The PADI Divemaster course is a significant commitment for both you and your instructor. You have committed to developing the skills, knowledge, attitude, and responsibility expected of a diving leader. PADI and your instructor expect nothing less than your best during this program and after as a PADI leader. Accepting you in the program means your instructor believes you have the potential to become a PADI leader. You'll probably find this course the most comprehensive you've taken in your diving career. It will expand and refine your knowledge of diving theory and procedures, your ability to perform and to demonstrate scuba and water skills, and those qualities that make a capable diver into a capable leader of divers. Before you can start along the path that takes you to the PADI Divemaster level, however, you need to know what a dive master is. In the eyes of those you lead, a dive master may be many things: a guide, a dive supervisor, a local wildlife expert, an instructional assistant, a counselor, an emergency manager, or a boat handling assistant. Without a doubt, familiarity with each of these roles may help you function as a dive master. But you can sum it up by saying the dive master leads by displaying the attitude and professionalism expected of a respected, knowledgeable role model. This professionalism and attitude manifest themselves through 4 role model traits: dive knowledge and skill, professional appearance, interpersonal skills, and judgment. Ultimately, divers are responsible for themselves and their own safety, but they will often seek your advice as a dive master about solving problems, about what to see, and about recommendations for techniques to use in the local diving environment. In many situations, divers look to a dive master as someone ready to help and manage in an emergency. And in training situations, instructors rely on dive masters to assist with logistics, supervision, and remedial skill development. These aspects of being a dive master call for diving knowledge and dive skills well above that required of a typical recreational diver. Refining and improving these abilities is an important part of the PADI Divemaster course. Besides what you know, professional appearance sets you apart as a role model. Like it or not, how you look affects the confidence of those who look to you for guidance. Your dress and grooming make a statement about how seriously you take your role. What exactly appropriate dress is varies with location and culture, but the expectation is there virtually everywhere. Professional experience also relates to your appearance and habits as a diver. As a role model, divers and students sometimes follow your example as much as your advice. As a dive master, this means you set the best example possible by having the appropriate equipment in good order and by practicing role model diving habits, in the water and out. Another concern is that a lack of professionalism, rather than being imitated, may simply undermine a dive master's credibility, the credibility of his dive operation, and, among entry-level divers, perhaps even the credibility of the dive community in general. Since it's hard to respect such a person, the unprofessional dive master may even have trouble enforcing dive operation policies and guidelines. Needless to say, divers may lack confidence in such a dive master. And professionalism includes your well-being, for the sake of being a role model as well as your health. A role model diver dives conservatively and observes safe diving practices to set a good example and to avoid decompression illness. You'll want to take the steps to stay in adequate shape for diving and the other demands of being a dive master by exercising to build strength and stamina, eating properly, and getting ample rest. Your interpersonal skills go hand in hand with professional appearance. Strong interpersonal skills give you the ability to get along with people, make them feel welcome, anticipate their needs, and show them a good time. Interpersonal skills include having a customer service attitude and realizing that even though you supervise divers and students, they are still customers you serve. It means making the effort and having the thoughtfulness to take extra steps they don't expect but sincerely appreciate. Interpersonal skills include the ability to respectfully and tactfully give advice or guidance, and the ability to motivate people to follow dive safety rules and recommendations. And you need patience. As long as you're a dive leader, those you supervise will present the same problems and situations and ask for your help again and again. Patience and a sincere care for people enable you to handle the same situation for the 1,000th time with the same enthusiasm, understanding, and compassion as the first. Being a dive master includes understanding laws and potential liabilities that apply to you as a dive master and maintaining appropriate insurance coverage for your activities. Even if you work primarily with students under an instructor's direction, keep in mind that the instructor's professional liability insurance does not cover his assistants. Risk management ranges from paying attention to required paperwork to following conservative dive practices and staying well within dive table or computer limits. Being a dive master can be physically demanding, so risk management means taking care of your health, such as getting ample rest and eating well. It means having diver accident insurance just in case. Risk management, and one of your responsibilities as a PADI member, includes staying familiar with and following PADI standards in the PADI Instructor Manual. Make a habit of periodically reviewing the manual and refreshing your knowledge about the programs you conduct and assist with. Likewise, you need to stay informed by reading the quarterly PADI training bulletins. Maintain your PADI membership so you receive the bulletin and other materials that keep you up to date with changes in training and training standards. Keeping your membership active is part of your commitment to being a professional, and it provides many benefits such as access to professional liability insurance, job placement information, the Undersea Journal, and assisting in dive mastering, the newsletter for PADI assistant instructors and dive masters within the Undersea Journal. And developing good habits with respect to risk management as a dive master will provide a solid foundation when you reach the PADI instructor level and begin handling additional risk management concerns. To be effective as a dive master, you need to have good judgment, the ability to make wise decisions that improve diver risk management, your effectiveness, and even the fun the divers you supervise have. This includes assessing whether the conditions are appropriate for diving, and assisting divers in managing their own safety, such as recommending techniques that make it easier to dive in the local environment, noting proper equipment for unique dive situations, or countless other variables you'll encounter when leading divers or assisting with students in training. Good judgment is about 75% common sense and 25% experience. As part of the course, your instructor will develop your professional judgment through practice and by sharing the thinking behind some of her judgments. This video looks at judgment situations similar to those you may experience as a dive master. Developing good judgment is one of the most valuable aspects of this course. It will serve you as a dive master and later when you become an assistant instructor and then an instructor. In fact, you'll probably find that it carries over into areas of your life that have nothing to do with diving. As you progress through the PADI Divemaster course, realize that as a leader, other divers look up to you even when you're not working in a leadership capacity. Being a role model means looking like and acting like the leader you are, even when you don't feel like it. If you can't set this kind of example for other divers, perhaps you should reconsider whether you're ready to be a dive master. As you develop and grow into a PADI Divemaster, continuously ask yourself these questions. Would I want to be in a group of divers supervised by me? And would I want to supervise divers who behave like me? Your goal is to be able to answer yes to both questions. The PADI Divemaster course helps you develop the skills and qualities you'll need as a dive master. It builds upon the skills you developed in the PADI Rescue Diver course, which is an important prerequisite for dive master training. You'll demonstrate your rescue abilities as part of the Dive Master course, and your instructor will help you brush up on and polish your rescue skills if it's been a while since you practiced them. The qualities you'll develop to become a dive master overlap, but you can divide your training into 3 broad categories, or modules. The first is water skills development. During this module, you'll develop your general swimming abilities and stamina. You'll also develop dive skills and underwater problem solving through exercises in confined and open water. The knowledge development module increases your familiarity with dive theory and with some of the considerations that apply to leading students, planning group dives, and other dive master duties. You'll accomplish this module through class sessions, reading and study, followed by examinations to show you've mastered the learning objectives. In a sense, the water skills and knowledge development modules provide the raw material you'll apply in the final module, practical application. This module gives you training and experience in supervising students and divers, which includes practice in applying leadership judgment. You may complete this portion of the course by working with actual students and divers as an intern under your instructor's supervision. Or, your instructor may have you role play in various exercises with other dive master candidates and staff to form the same abilities. Either way, the practical application portion primarily develops your ability to think through the variables involved in leading divers and students and to accommodate those variables in a reasonable manner. Just as the PADI Rescue Diver course taught you to think on your feet and adapt to a rescue situation, the Dive Master course will teach you to adapt to supervisory situations. For efficiency and to accommodate student and instructor needs, the PADI Dive Master course employs flexible scheduling. So your instructor will probably integrate these modules into a single schedule that progresses you through all 3 modules in a given period, with room to accommodate extra time as you need it. This video focuses on supervisory situations like those typically handled by dive masters. First, we look at supervising certified divers, which is a common dive master function in resorts, on dive boats, and while leading travel. Then we'll turn to your role with students in training and functioning as an instructional assistant. And finally, we look at the programs you'll be able to conduct as an insured, certified PADI Divemaster without an instructor present. You'll see some of the benefits divers, students and instructors get from having a dive master on hand, what they may expect from a dive master, and some factors you might have to consider in supervisory situations. It's impossible to include everything you might need to consider into a course, much less a video. Rather, watch the video and look for the kinds of considerations that exist, think about how you would anticipate them, and assess how your judgment might affect diving decisions. By developing the ability to think this way, you'll be able to function effectively as a dive master in virtually any situation. In many areas, but especially in resort environments, the most common dive master responsibility is supervising certified divers. Since they're trained and qualified, certified divers can dive independently. but they often prefer diving under Divemaster guidance. Among other benefits, a Divemaster provides local area information such as advice on the techniques to use, helps divers reach the best dive sites, and in some situations, adds safety. But what divers want and need from a Divemaster varies significantly. For instance, a newly certified diver may want close guidance and even reassurance that she's doing everything appropriately. But experienced divers might appreciate a Divemaster more as someone they can rely on to get the boat to the best diving, and as an experienced diver who can give advice on where to go and what to look for underwater. And the same divers might ask for more details when they're in a less familiar environment than when they're in a more familiar environment. It's impossible to predict every possible combination of divers and circumstances, but universally, what divers want from a Divemaster is someone who's going to help them have fun. And since a dive usually isn't fun when it's unsafe, most divers consider assisting with safety part of a Divemaster's role. This raises the point that you may sometimes find yourself supervising a diver who doesn't seek your recommendations, but who might obviously benefit from them. This typically occurs when a diver doesn't recognize something in the dive environment that affects equipment or technique choice. The diver is, of course, responsible for finding out about these things before diving, but you may find opportunities to assist divers in managing their own safety. In such situations, your advice and suggestions will be appreciated more often than not. And what divers want may vary with the dive objective. For example, a team of highly experienced divers taking photographs may want someone who can organize everything so all the divers can hit the water together. This puts you in a somewhat different role from supervising a group that will just be sightseeing in buddy pairs. And events may impose a variety of roles that perhaps you would prefer to avoid, but hopefully you're prepared to handle. Let's look at dive planning and preparation, the keys to getting the dives you supervise for certified divers off on a solid footing. At first, preparing for a dive with, say, a dozen people may seem overwhelming, especially considering all the variables that can affect what to prepare and what part you, the Divemaster, play in those preparations. But you can simplify dive preparation and planning by thinking through the dive. In other words, go through the dive mentally from the moment your responsibilities begin to the moment they end. With experience, you may be able to do this entirely in your head. But to start, you may find it easier to make notes and lists that detail what to do. Let's apply this to the example of planning a charter boat dive. You might want to think through the dive beginning at a point well before the dive. For instance, mentally you might realize that first you need to check the weather and conditions, and assuming they're acceptable, then you'll need to pack personal items. Then you might think about what you have to do at the dive operation before heading to the boat. Perhaps you know you'll need to take tanks to the boat, and that the first aid kit and emergency oxygen equipment aren't kept aboard, so you'll need to take those. Also, you remember that typically some divers show up without their assumption of risk forms, so you'll need to take some extras. Note everything you need to do before leaving for the boat. Next, think about what you need to do to get the boat ready, such as stowing equipment and loading tanks, which makes you remember that some divers rented equipment and you need to bring it from the dive center. So you add this to the list of things you need to do at the dive center. Going through the dive step by step will remind you of the steps you need to do first, so you can include them in your earlier preparations. After going through everything you need to do to prepare the boat, you might then think about what you need to do as you welcome divers. Next, perhaps, you would think about the cruise to the dive site. For instance, you may realize divers will often get thirsty on the way out, reminding you that you'll need to get bottled water on the way to the dive center. Or, thinking about checking divers in and out of the water might remind you to clean your dive roster slate at the dive center. Mentally, you continue through the dive until you've covered it all, beginning to end, perhaps including things you would do after the dive too. After you've mentally rehearsed the day, you should have a reasonably thorough plan that covers what you'll be doing and what you'll need to do to prepare, if everything goes as planned. Now go through the same sequence, thinking about possible emergencies or problems that you'll want to be ready to handle. Thinking of these adds to your preparation list, but it also means you have an action plan if problems occur. You learn to think ahead in much the same way during the PADI Rescue Diver course. Now you're applying it more broadly to supervising divers. For example, you realize that you could arrive at the site and find conditions unexpectedly poor. This prompts you to plan an alternative site. Or, knowing that local currents can be strong, you might anticipate that a diver could accidentally miss the trail line and that divers might appreciate a reminder to account for current when planning their dives and to carry appropriate signal devices. For a complex or strenuous dive, you might be ready to lead a tour or change to a different site, depending upon the interests and wishes of the divers. Experience with both supervising and diving will sharpen your ability to anticipate circumstances like these. Most dive boats have oxygen and first aid available for handling emergencies as a matter of routine. But your preparation might, for example, periodically include inspecting these to be sure that equipment's in working order, that the first aid kit has been kept stocked, and that emergency contact information is up to date. The idea is to reasonably foresee problems and emergencies and to include the necessary steps in your dive preparations. But avoid the pitfall of letting your imagination run away so that you're trying to prepare for unreasonable circumstances. Let common sense guide you in this regard. You probably find evaluating the weather and dive conditions pretty straightforward, but the divers you supervise provide other variables you may want to consider. Divers differ in experience, training, preferences, and fitness, among other things. But some of these differences may not be obvious to the casual observer. During the PADI Rescue Diver course, you learn to observe other divers for signs and behaviors that could indicate a problem. This might include watching for possible problems such as stress or gear-related difficulties, or noting qualifications that could benefit emergency management, such as a person who has a captain's license and can handle boats. Once a certified diver knows the conditions, techniques, and other demands of a particular dive site, the choice to dive and accept the risks of the dive is the responsibility of the diver, not you. Still, in some supervisory situations, you may want more information about each diver. During the PADI Divemaster course, you'll learn to expand upon what you learned as a rescue diver about assessing divers for physical or mental stress and for potential problems. But just as in the discussion on dive planning and preparation, effective diver assessment may best be described as a way of thinking rather than just a set of techniques. As a supervising dive master, if appropriate for the circumstances, you can directly assess diver training and experience by checking certifications, reviewing logbooks, or by simply talking to the divers. These can tell you the diver's training level and how long ago the diver completed the level and other information. It's sometimes helpful to know how recently each diver has been diving and whether the diver has experience in similar environments or conditions. What you note can help you tailor the dive site choice or the dive briefing, or both. You can also make some experience assessments through indirect assessment, such as watching them set up equipment and how they interact with each other. Again, think about what your observations may mean. For example, suppose you note a diver with all new equipment, or with a significant amount of rental equipment. This could indicate the diver may be recently certified and comparatively inexperienced. A lot of rental equipment might also indicate a diver who dives only occasionally. A diver who fumbles a bit setting up her gear may be inexperienced or may not have been diving for a while. Having all older, dated equipment may indicate a diver who has been away from diving, or it can indicate an experienced diver who likes what he has and doesn't see any reason to invest in new gear. Other signs suggest recent experience and training. Up-to-date but obviously used equipment, for instance, usually indicates an active diver who has been diving relatively recently. Another sign of a possible problem might be a diver who appears excessively weighted. Also, think in terms of interaction and behavior and looking for signs of physical and psychological stress or inexperience, like you learned in the PADI Rescue Diver course. For example, excessive dependence on a buddy, talking constantly, or sitting secluded and withdrawn. Could all indicate nervousness and discomfort with the dive. But you need to think about the whole picture. A diver who sits quietly alone, but whose logbook shows that she dives frequently in the local environment, might simply be a quiet person who prefers to relax in solitude. If you think a diver is experiencing stress, your best role is to help that person manage stress in a positive way. As you recall from the PADI Rescue Diver course, you want to encourage solution thinking, or, if appropriate, help the person realize that it's okay to not make the dive. If you suspect a diver is stressed underwater, you can do the same thing. Even though you can't talk, through signals and body language you can help the diver redirect his thinking and handle the situation positively. Note, though, that assessing certified divers isn't intended to relieve them of taking responsibility for their own safety. Ultimately, the diver makes the decision to dive or not, what techniques to use or not, and whether to follow your advice or not. What you're trying to do is help the diver be responsible for himself. An analogy might be if someone is driving an automobile and you're a passenger. The driver, not you, is responsible for the safety and operation of the car. But the driver will usually appreciate it if, for example, you were to alert him that he's about to turn the wrong way down a one-way street. Likewise, if you see a potential problem, most divers appreciate it if you tactfully point it out, especially if you have some recommendations they can consider as possible solutions. During dive planning and preparation, you'll usually decide where to supervise from based upon variables including your role, the anticipated training and experience of the divers, the conditions you expect, whether diving from a boat or from shore, and so on. Even if your dive operation uses a particular vantage point most of the time, it's a good idea to periodically think through where you'll be supervising from, especially when contingency planning calls for changing to accommodate circumstances. In thinking about workable vantage points, the two primary considerations are being able to see the divers and being ready to respond if you're needed. With certified divers, most of the time you'll find it simplest and most effective to manage activities from the surface, out of the water. The theoretical ideal vantage point is close to the water where you can provide assistance quickly and up high where you can see all divers' bubbles. However, this ideal doesn't exist. So unless you've got someone assisting you, you may need to choose a spot that offers the best compromise for the situation. Supervising underwater can be an option under some circumstances. It works well when you're leading all divers as a single group, or when there are other individuals supervising from the surface, allowing you to focus on a single group. The advantage is that you're immediately at hand to help avoid or respond to a problem. The general guideline is to avoid underwater supervision if it would mean no out-of-the-water supervision and there's more than one group of divers. But again, this can have exceptions when you think through the dive plan. Suppose a dive group consists of 3 newly certified divers and 4 experienced instructors familiar with the area. The instructors are more than capable of making the dive safely without a dive master waiting at the surface. So you might be most effective leading the new divers on an underwater tour. And don't limit yourself. You may think of in-water supervision as diving, but the optimum supervision might be accompanying the group in the water at the surface. When you supervise underwater, you'll need to consider what your best vantage point will be. Think about which diver or divers, based on your assessments, might be most likely to need assistance. Think about the dive site and reasonably likely problems. If something in the environment could be a problem source, you might stay between it and the divers. For example, along a wall, a likely problem could be divers failing to watch their depth and descending too far. It might be best to stay below the group to prevent this. Ask yourself about how conditions like visibility, current, or waves might influence the most effective place for you. And consider that your function may affect your positioning. If you're guiding a tour, for instance, you'll probably end up leading. But in other circumstances, someone in the group may lead. Since you're just escorting the group, it may be better to hang back where you can see everyone. It's easy to regard a briefing as a discussion on dive procedures, safety recommendations, and the environment. But while a briefing usually contains all of these, it's often more effective to treat a briefing as summarizing your thinking with the divers you supervise. This means letting the divers in on the reasons for your guidelines, procedures, and other dive recommendations. Treating the briefing as an overview of your thought process when you plan the dive has several benefits. First, it gives credibility to you and your recommendations by showing that they're well thought out and not arbitrary. Second, understanding the rationale and value of your recommendations helps divers adapt if conditions change. Third, understanding the reasons for a recommendation or procedure provides the basis for finding an alternate procedure or recommendation if it poses a problem for a diver. It's a good idea to try to match the briefing to the divers as well as to the environment. You might, for example, give a relatively simple site description to divers who plan to sightsee on a shallow tropical reef, but more detailed descriptions to experienced photographers or videographers looking for specific aquatic wildlife. The order doesn't usually matter, but a typical dive briefing covers the dive site name and general characteristics such as the bottom topography and depth range, points of interest, and any special precautions regarding the site, including why divers should observe those precautions if it's not obvious. You'll usually cover entry and exit locations and any recommended techniques specific to the environment. It's common to review general safety rules, such as safety stops, recommended air reserves, and pre-dive safety checks, though certified divers are responsible for these things themselves. And as appropriate, you'll want to cover safety guidelines specific to the diving environment or techniques. Again, ideally explaining why they apply. The briefing is a good time to confirm that everyone has a buddy, review signals and communications, and cover emergency procedures such as what to do if separated from a buddy and recall procedures. It's also a good idea to tell divers what your role will be during the dive, such as whether you'll be leading a group underwater or supervising from the surface. Typically, briefings cover information that enhances diver comfort. You may want to point out local facilities such as showers, toilets, places to get food or drink, where to put personal items and the like. As appropriate, mention areas that are off limits, such as private property when shore diving or the bridge when boat diving. And keep in mind that a dive briefing has a role in customer service and helping divers have fun. You'll usually find divers pay better attention when you make briefings fun, and they appreciate suggestions about what to look for, the best spots on the reef, and other details that make the dive exciting. Finally, remember that a briefing isn't usually intended to plan the dive for everyone. Rather, your briefing provides educational information so buddy teams can plan their own dives. It also gives divers a clear enough picture that they can decide for themselves whether the dive is within their capabilities. Some dive masters make a point of reminding divers that the briefing doesn't replace their own dive planning, pre-dive safety checks, and other safety responsibilities. As mentioned earlier, during your Divemaster course internship or practical application exercise, you'll learn to make judgment decisions under your instructor's guidance. Part of this involves watching your instructor make judgment decisions and understanding how and why she made them. If you don't understand, ask for an explanation. When supervising certified divers, along with accepted practices and diving standards, your judgment may determine, for example, whether the boat goes out for the day. And with certified divers, your control over their activities is usually limited to influencing them to use good judgment themselves. So good judgment on your part will be most effective when it is credible as well as appropriate. As mentioned, you establish credibility in part by discussing the rationale behind your recommendations with divers. You could best describe appropriately conservative recommendations as decisions as those that avoid problems and that leave room to handle problems if they occur. They don't differ much from those you'd make for yourself, except that you're helping other divers take into account their own abilities and limits. Let's look at a scenario in which you're a dive master supervising certified divers on a day trip aboard a chartered dive boat. That morning, you checked the weather and tides and found that you can expect fair to good conditions and a fairly flat sea, with small wind waves at most. It's the first boat trip out of the day, and you're taking out a small group traveling together that you took out the previous day. They are all certified advanced open water diver or higher, and their main interest is sightseeing. Besides yourself, the boat will be manned by the boat captain. The dive is planned as a deep dive along a wall where the local protocol is for you to escort the group. At the dive site, you find conditions good, with no current. In a moment, the program will pause. When it does, think about what steps you might take in addition to usual dive preparation, to prepare for this dive scenario. Think about one possible problem divers might have that's unique to this scenario and what you might include in your briefing to help them avoid it. And consider what might be your most effective position underwater for supervising. As you're aware, preparing for a dive has many steps. But in addition to the steps you take for a dive of any depth, for this deep dive, you might consider having contingency breathing equipment at 5 meters, 15 feet. A deep dive may have several additional concerns. In this scenario, one is that a diver may accidentally exceed his planned maximum depth. With this point in mind, you decide to escort the group from below. During the briefing, you remind divers to watch their gauges and that since you'll be escorting the group from below, they can also watch their depth by not going deeper than you. You also get agreement from the group on a maximum depth and dive time, making it clear that buddy teams can choose shallower, shorter limits if they like. The time you proposed was based on a depth deeper than the planned maximum depth, which gives everyone a margin for error. Now let's look at how you might handle a problem during the dive. In a moment, the program will pause again. Think about how, in this scenario, you might handle a diver who begins to exceed the maximum planned depth, one who slightly exceeds it, and one who clearly exceeds the depth limits of safe diving. Just as you learned in the PADI Rescue Diver course, there is no single right solution to a problem. You have to think and then act based on the circumstances. But here are some possible ways to assist a diver who begins to exceed, who slightly exceeds, and who grossly exceeds the maximum dive depth. In this scenario, there are no currents, so a diver who begins to exceed the maximum depth is probably drifting downward accidentally. Simply alerting the diver will usually solve the problem. A diver who descends below you may have also drifted down unintentionally. But he also might have spotted something interesting and doesn't think about the depth. This diver may be harder to catch, but alerting the diver will usually correct the problem. You can continue the dive if he didn't exceed time and depth limits. In this calm, currentless scenario, if a diver significantly exceeds the maximum depth, it's not reasonable that he does so unknowingly. Handling this calls for judgment on your part. It's important to keep from putting yourself at serious risk. A diver who willfully violates safe diving practices and the planned dive depth cannot expect you or anyone in your group to endanger themselves because of his own poor judgment. Instead, you might try banging on your tank or some other method of getting his attention and getting him to ascend. In some circumstances, you may be able to catch the diver and get him to ascend before he reaches a depth that would be hazardous to you. Whether you elect to do this depends on how fast you can reach him, how deep he is, and whether leaving the rest of the group might create any control problems. If you elect to catch the diver, or he comes back to a safe depth on his own, you may need to abort the dive and ascend immediately to the safety stop. You may need to redetermine time limits using the recreational dive planner or your dive computer. Let's consider what you might do in this situation. A diver willfully descends to a hazardous depth or willfully violates other safe dive practices and creates a hazard for you, others in the group, and/or himself. Fortunately, no accident occurs. The next day, the same diver shows up to go diving with your operation again. What are your options? This situation may require discussion with your supervisor or operations manager, but your first option may be to decline to serve him. Remember, you're under no obligation to take out a diver who endangers you, other divers, or himself, particularly if he does so knowingly. Another alternative might be to serve the diver if you're convinced that he won't repeat the behavior. This could be through discussions that assure you and the rest of the group that he understands the seriousness of his actions, or simply because the dive will be at a site that makes repeating the behavior impossible. For instance, a diver who exceeds a safe depth on a wall dive can't repeat the behavior diving on a reef with a maximum depth of 10 meters, 30 feet. There's no single correct solution to these kinds of problems. You'll have to apply your training, experience, and good judgment to each situation. Compared to supervising certified divers, you'll probably find the dive master's role with students in training both simpler and more complex. Simpler in that with students, you often have more direct control, and more complex in that what students and instructors need tends to be broader and more varied than what certified divers need. And just as your role varies when supervising general diving activities, your role varies when leading students depending on the course, the student, and the training environment, among other factors. Students want to have fun in their diver courses. That's why they take up diving, and they expect learning to dive or continuing their diver education to be fun too. This means part of your job is doing everything possible to make learning fun for students. Especially in the open water diver course, student enjoyment influences whether a diver continues his diver education or even whether he continues to dive. So this isn't a secondary consideration. To the student diver, you're often an important role model. Your professionalism and the example you set with your equipment and your dive habits can influence the habits students have after training. Students notice inconsistencies between what they hear and what they see. When your practices mirror what the instructor teaches, such as securing your gauges so they won't damage aquatic life, you add credibility to his message. And you may act as a role model when assisting a student who is having difficulty mastering a skill. Although the student sees the instructor's demonstration first, your demonstrations may be necessary too in helping the student achieve mastery. Besides setting an example, your presence reassures the class when the instructor's job demands attention to one student. Even though you may do little more than hover over the group and watch it at these times, don't underestimate the extra confidence students gain by knowing you're there to help if needed. The instructor you work with also sees you as someone who assists with class control. Broadly, an instructor sees you as a member of her instructional team. An instructor relies on you and her other assistants to coordinate tasks directed toward a common goal, guiding students to successfully complete and enjoy each diver course. This means your job can include logistical tasks ranging from transferring equipment to a training site, to tracking students and staff as they enter and exit the water, to managing the flow of student groups to the instructor during multiple level training. By handling logistics, you allow the instructor to concentrate more on the individual needs of the students. You're probably familiar with these types of duties from watching the assistants who helped with your PADI Open Water, Advanced Open Water, and Rescue Diver courses. Likewise, you probably recognize that as a certified dive master, you make entry-level instruction more efficient by allowing the instructor to conduct exercises while you attend to students. This greatly simplifies supervision concerns and helps the dives proceed smoothly. As part of the teaching team, you're also an extra set of eyes for the instructor. This means, for instance, that you may sometimes escort students in training, not just for additional safety, but to obtain additional information about student performance for the instructor. Your observations give the instructor extra information she can use to effectively guide students in attaining course objectives. The thinking strategy for maximum effectiveness while assisting with students in training may be summed up best as anticipate student and instructor needs. Through experience and by getting to know each instructor you assist, you'll quickly learn what you can do without being asked to make instruction more effective. And you learn to think on your feet when problems arise and carry out or suggest solutions that minimize the inconvenience on students and the instructor. Apart from general supervision and handling logistics, as a dive master you'll find assisting the diver training processes frequently puts you in two positions: helping slower students and supervising students during continuing education courses. Working with students who need extra time in developing skills, especially during the open water diver course, gives you valuable experience that will help you later as a PADI assistant instructor and as a PADI instructor. It's not your role to teach beginning divers, which is why students begin each skill by listening to the instructor's presentation, by watching her demonstration, and by initially practicing with her. But when you need to spend some extra time with a student who's having difficulty with a skill, your role model demonstrations make learning easier. Although we normally think of a dive skill as a single skill, from the beginner's point of view, a dive skill is a series of key skills or steps called critical attributes. They're critical in that if the student doesn't include the steps, she can't complete the skill successfully. Students you assist have already seen the skill demonstrated, but commonly have difficulty because they skip or perform improperly one of the critical attributes. In assisting the student, watch for these steps. and then emphasize what the student needs to change by repeating the skill at demonstration quality. That is, go through the skill in a slow, step-by-step manner that allows the student to discern all the critical attributes and their sequence. Once the student recognizes the proper conduct and sequence of all the skill attributes, she'll normally be able to perform the entire skill. With each repetition, the steps flow together ever more smoothly until they become a single skill in the student's mind. After you're satisfied with the student's performance, let the instructor know. The instructor makes the final assessment that the student has mastered the skill. Supervising students during continuing education courses usually differs from supervising open water diver students because you're working with certified divers who've already mastered diving fundamentals. With them, your job may simply be that of a guide or escort familiar with the dive site, or that of an experienced buddy who helps divers as they practice skills already introduced by the instructor. In some cases, such as during the rescue diver course, students may practice skills on you when you play the role of victim or patient in an emergency scenario. Again, the instructor must assess a student's performance and judge whether she's demonstrated mastery. But as mentioned, your perspective can give her additional information that benefits her training efforts. It helps to review the specific performance requirements for each training dive you help with before diving. Let's take a look at a scenario in which you're a dive master assisting an open water diver student who is having trouble clearing a completely flooded mask. The student has already seen the instructor's demonstration of clearing a fully flooded mask. She cleared a partially flooded mask successfully, but has had trouble getting a fully flooded mask cleared completely. The instructor has asked you to help the student master this skill. In a moment, this program will pause. Think about the strategy you'd use to help this student, starting with how you would begin helping this student. Continue when you've developed a strategy and the first step. There are many approaches in this situation, none of which are wrong if they help the student. You may have chosen to ask the student about her difficulty, which might tell you what you need to know. But the student may not know where she's having problems, so you'll probably find it most efficient to simply have her try to do the skill for you. Watch the student's practice and determine the difficulty. If you have trouble spotting it, back up and watch again, just as you might have a student repeat a skill for you. After you've identified the problem, think about how you might help the student. Then, restart the program to confirm that you identified the problem and for some suggestions on how you might help the student. Let's look at the student's practice again. As you've already learned, the usual reason for skill difficulty is that a student performs one or more critical attributes incorrectly or out of sequence. And that's the problem in this scenario. notice that the student exhales primarily through her mouth, not her nose. But she's exhaling some through her nose, as revealed by the fact that she clears the mask part of the way. This also explains why she succeeded in clearing a partially flooded mask, but not a fully flooded one. Usually, you begin by reinforcing what the student is doing right, then addressing the attributes that need correction in a caring, positive manner. Reminding this student that she needs to exhale through her nose might be all it takes to allow her to achieve mastery. But it's not always that simple. In this scenario, the student doesn't know how to control whether she's exhaling through her mouth or her nose. You may need to help the student master one or more critical attributes or remember their sequence before she can master the entire skill. For this scenario, for example, you might have the student practice inhaling through her mouth and exhaling through her nose at the surface to develop her control. After she can do that effortlessly, have her try to clear her mask again. If she's now mastered all the critical attributes and their sequence, she should succeed with only a bit more practice. Once you're certified as a PADI Divemaster, there are a few PADI programs you can conduct without a PADI instructor present, provided you have professional liability insurance. The first of these is Discover Local Diving. Discover Local Diving is an orientation to an environment for certified divers. It's not a course, but you may include local techniques that apply to the environment. The emphasis is on showing divers things they need and want to know, including what to avoid, but also what's special and interesting about local diving. Since it's not a course, Discover Local Diving has no training objectives, but you still want to sign participant logbooks. Stamping their adventure logs with the Discover Local Diving stamp can help to maintain diver interest by giving the dive more prominence than a signature alone. Scuba Review is another program you can conduct for certified divers. The Scuba Tune-Up Guidebook or multimedia help divers brush up on their dive knowledge, then you can check over their work and answer any questions. Then you can help them brush up on their skills. Since Scuba Review participants are already trained and certified, you'll be reminding and reviewing skills, not teaching them. Discover Snorkeling is an experience for uncertified people who want to discover the underwater world. It's not a course, nor is it skin diving. So think of it as a tour that allows people to explore shallow water without training. Your role is to help snorkelers get their equipment adjusted, to advise them how to interact with the environment, to answer questions, and to generally lend a hand so they have fun. To discover the underwater world video and other materials, such as the Discover Snorkeling Instructor Guide and the PADI Instructor Manual, support your efforts to make the experience enjoyable. The PADI Skin Diver course, on the other hand, is a simple course you can teach according to the standards in the PADI Instructor Manual. You'll find it a program enjoyed by youngsters who aren't quite old enough to take up scuba diving yet, people interested in skin diving for fitness, and snorkelers who want to expand their underwater exploration but aren't interested in scuba diving. Becoming a PADI Divemaster is a challenge and commitment. It means dedicating yourself to improving your skills as a diver and your knowledge of dive theory. It means becoming a dive leader and learning to think like a dive leader. It means continuing your education so that you continue to grow as a leader. As a PADI Divemaster, you've become a PADI member, part of the PADI family, with benefits and obligations. As a PADI member, your actions and conduct reflect to a degree on all PADI members everywhere. Becoming a PADI Divemaster is a commitment to representing the PADI organisation well in everything you do. But big commitments yield big rewards. Reaching the PADI Divemaster level opens the door to a full or part-time profession in recreational diving. Depending upon where you are in the dive community, you may find immediate opportunities to gain experience by assisting with PADI courses, by conducting scuba review, discover local diving and discover snorkeling, by teaching the PADI skin diver course, or by supervising certified divers. And some rewards may not appear for some time. Many PADI Divemasters find the leadership qualities they develop in this course and through their experience leading divers carries over into areas of their life that have nothing to do with diving. Your next step on the PADI career path will probably be to complete the PADI Assistant Instructor course. This course establishes rudimentary skills needed for teaching scuba divers and accelerates your development into a PADI open water scuba instructor. As an assistant instructor, you can earn qualifications that certify you as a PADI specialty diver instructor as soon as you become a PADI instructor. And that's the next step after you reach the PADI assistant instructor level. Qualifying as a PADI open water scuba instructor takes you through the dive industry's most comprehensive leadership program, the PADI Instructor Development Course, with final certification when you successfully complete an instructor examination. Becoming a PADI instructor is not only rewarding, but there are more opportunities for PADI instructors than for any other professional rating in diving. But to succeed in today's dynamic dive industry, it takes more than reaching the PADI instructor level. If you've set your sights on dive retailing, seek out training in servicing dive equipment and in retail sales. These skills make you more valuable to potential employers and open more doors as your career unfolds. If you're thinking about working for a resort dive operation, compressor repair, engine repair, boat handling and similar skills can all widen your career choices. In many ways, the resort dive master is a jack of all trades, not just a dive master. See your instructor or PADI course director about the PADI Career Advancement Series, which was developed specifically to train PADI leaders in customer service skills. Now, as you start down the road to PADI Divemaster, all of us in the PADI family, at PADI Worldwide and at the PADI local area offices, welcome you aboard as a PADI member, as one who has joined the ranks of diving's leaders. We wish you the best success in becoming a PADI Divemaster, wherever your dive career takes you.